Pendulum is one of those kinds of decks that really needs a refreshing start. I mean, when we look at it in terms of the rest of the game, we really haven't had much Pendulum at the top tables. I mean, sure, we got Endymion in 2019, but that wasn't really enough to propel it to the tier 1 status, or at least not enough people played the deck in order for it to be considered tier 1 based on representation. But with this in mind, we need to look into the future. I feel like Pendulum hasn't really gotten any support, other than the Metal Foe support of recent, but generally speaking, Pendulum has become quote-unquote forgotten. And in today's video, I want to redefine what Pendulum truly means as a mechanic in the game, and how I would approach making Pendulum more generic than it ever has been. So looking back in the history of the game, we've gotten numerous amounts of Pendulum archetypes. Some notable examples include Magicians, Metal Foes, Endymion, anything else you can think of. Zephyra, Odd Eyes, whatever the case. And I think the problem here isn't the fact that we are getting Pendulum archetypes, but rather we haven't gotten cards that really support all archetypes. I think the beauty of Pendulum is they're both monsters and spells, and so moving forward we can't think about Pendulum as archetypes anymore. So today I felt like exploring the world of Pendulum as of right now, whether that be through Endymion or the new Metal Foe support, and examine what the true problem is with Pendulum right now and how to redefine them in the modern era so that way they can be relevant once again. To start, let's talk about Endymion, because I do genuinely think this is probably the most like quote-unquote meta relevant Pendulum deck right now, and then I'm going to discuss Metal Foes afterwards and then move into how I would re-establish them in today's metagame. So for example, let's take Endymion. Endymion's one of those decks where I feel it is the most modern aged Pendulum deck, of course, because it's the most recent one. You have cards like Servant of Endymion, which is really potent by itself if you're able to activate 3 spells, but that becomes the entire problem with Endymion and why so many people gravitate away from it. It's the fact that you need other cards to make individual cards good. When we take a look at a deck like Dragon Link, this strategy is able to utilize cards like Black Metal Dragon in order to pull off a 1-card combo of insane end boards. And while Endymion is able to set up insane end boards, it also requires your entire hand in order to play. You want to be able to play with the fewest amount of cards. So if you're not able to do that, then why play Pendulum over a different combo deck? Even if we keep in mind that Endymion sets up extremely powerful end boards, it's not always consistent. Like I said, you need all your hand to do so, and if you get stopped with multiple hand traps or even just one hand trap a lot of the time, you're going to have to pass your turn. Not that Endymion can't play through hand traps, but the point being, it just creates a whole ton of inconsistencies that you would prefer not to have. Additionally, this problem still persists into the future with an archetype like Metal Foes and the support they recently received. See, Metal Foes is the type of deck that requires you to have multiple cards in your hand that are like Metal Foes, for example, in order to play the game. And so you can use something like your Metal Foes to pop other ones, and they got new support where if one is destroyed, you can recur another Metal Foe monster from your extra deck. And while this is really strong, we also have to keep in mind that this again persists to the problem of requiring multiple cards to play the game. And inherently, when you look at Pendulum as a deck, the strategy is to set 2 scales and Pendulum summon. And while back in the day this used to be really powerful because you can summon a mass amount of monsters from the extra deck and in the form of something like a Soul Charge like effect, the problem is that nowadays you aren't able to summon all those monsters back. Instead, you're only able to summon 1 from your extra deck and then summon a ton from your hand. And while yes, there is the argument to be made that depending on the deck and the time period, this is okay, generally speaking, this is a neg 2 in order to summon 1 monster from your extra deck and summon a ton from hand. Like, that's just not worthwhile. Inherently, Pendulum summoning is a neg 1 as of right now, and we need to fix that problem by having a deck that either sets a 1-card scale and sets one in the extra deck or something along those lines that also has functions of defense and powerful plays that enable it to be tier 1, or we're going to need to shift the idea of Pendulum as a whole. And that's where I want to get to my argument, that is, why not use Pendulum instead of a mechanic in order to summon monsters, we actually use it in the function of it being a monster and a spell. There are two ways to approach future support, for any archetype for that matter. One, you can make them pendulum monsters and have it both be, again, a monster and a spell in the same card, or you print really powerful spell cards like Nadir. But I think the beauty of pendulum monsters that are able to be monsters and spells is they serve multiple functions, rather than just the one function your spell may provide. It also revitalizes the point of a pendulum monster. I mean, we can take two examples real quick. One, Tri-Brigade. Tri-Brigade is the type of deck that really helps support Beast Warriors, Beasts, and Winged Beasts immensely. And while I'm not saying this was bad in the slightest, I think this is a perfect point of reference to show how pendulum could be revitalized in the future. For example, what if those Tri-Brigade monsters were, instead of just monsters, they were pendulum monsters, and the ability to Miracle Fusion could have been on the pendulum effect. Now, do I think that would have made them worse? I don't know. It depends on how they would design the cards at that point. But my point still stands that I feel like pendulum needs to be revitalized in some way in order for them to be relevant once again. And I feel like constantly making new pendulum archetypes kind of defeats the purpose of pendulum as a specific mechanic. But pendulum has been just constantly ignored, and not that that's a bad thing, because it's really hard to honestly make pendulum archetypes constantly when you don't always want to make pendulum archetypes. You want to make different kinds of archetypes, and so pendulum forced into this archetype role is definitely not preferable. But I do want to point out one specific thing that I really think it was a genius pendulum monster, and that is Chaos Emperor, the Dragon of Armageddon. I think this is the perfect description of what I believe to be an amazing pendulum monster, and kind of showcases my entire point with this video, because Chaos Emperor is a spell in the form of recurring dragons from your banish pile, which synergizes really well with Chaos as a whole, but then it can summon itself as a body and act as removal. This is exactly my point here. We want more cards like this that support either different archetypes or different typings in of themselves, but we just don't have that right now. And so if we can see that from Konami in the future as a shift for pendulum, I think it will make a much better game as a whole and bring more diversity to the game. Let me know what you guys think about redefining pendulum in the comment section below. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and turn on that notification bell to join BladeYGO gang. The best gang around. No, but anyways, thank you all so much, and with that, I hope to see you soon.